very nice to have you here with us, Minister. Now, we've got 45 minutes with you, just to be clear. And obviously introduce your team, some of whom we've seen many times before. I think we've seen everyone virtually. But anyway, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you do know the team that are with me, so I won't go through introductions except to say that we have Ministry of Justice, including a good part of the firearms team that are here with us today. But I'll just have some brief introductory remarks. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee today as Associate Minister of Justice, and I will keep my opening remarks brief, just for the benefit of the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb.
Oh, that's it.
The Associate Justice portfolio covers a range of areas including firearms, alcohol, adoption, anti-money laundering and more. Across all these distinct areas, it is necessary to protect public safety while also ensuring that law-abiding New Zealanders can go about their business and enjoy their lives without unnecessary red tape, cost and paperwork. Regulation needs to be practical, proportionate and workable for the people and businesses who follow the rules. On firearms, we are reforming the law, regulations and institutions to improve public safety while treating licensed firearm owners fairly. Budget 2026 provides $44.9 million over 4 years to deliver the Arms Act rewrite so that we have a firearms system that improves public safety, trust and provides efficient, effective and responsive regulatory services to licensed firearm owners. We are also overhauling New Zealand's anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism system to make it easier to do business and harder to do crime. The government has also taken decisive action on overseas adoptions. Last year, we moved quickly with urgent legislation to reduce the risk of harm to some children and young people adopted overseas. In May, the government introduced the Overseas Adoptions Legislation Bill to replace the temporary changes that are due to expire on 1 July 2027. And finally, our alcohol reform package is focused on practical regulation. The goal is to make the licensing process fairer, make it easier to host events and cut through red tape affecting Kiwi businesses without increasing the risk of alcohol-related harm. Across this portfolio, the theme is consistent, Mr. Chair. We're protecting the public from real harm, backing legitimate users and businesses, and cutting red tape where it is safe to do so. I'm now open to take questions.
What a perfectly timed introduction. Right, I'm going to turn to Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your introductory remarks, Minister. I've had a couple of emails through from members of the public who are firearm owners who have raised the same issue, and it's a new type of firearm that's been available called a push-button rifle. And you might know more than I, but it's described as not quite a semi-automatic, but very close. It has a button on the receiver and has to be pushed to load another cartridge. It cycles slower than, say, an AR-15, but faster than any other type of repeating gun, and is designed so firing can take place very rapidly and comes in a .223 calibre. There's a concern being raised that there's a weakness in our laws, that these aren't covered by the current legislation. Do you have a view on whether they should be prohibited or where they should sit in terms of their capability?
Thank you. Thank the member for her question, because there is some information out there that I don't think is quite right on the push-button firearms. For example, it's not a new type of action or a new type of firearm. It's been around for quite some substantial period of time. It has been approved by New Zealand Police to be within the country. It is nothing like a semi-automatic at all. It can run either on gas or on inertia. And a semi-automatic is where a firearm will, once you pull the trigger, it will fire, it will eject, and it will reload a new round ready for the person or the operator to just pull the trigger again. A push-button firearm does not work like that. When the trigger has been pulled, a round will expel, the action will open, a round will pop out, but the action is actually held back, or the bolt is held back. So it's not a semi-automatic is where you go through the entire process, all of the steps all at once. This does not occur with a push button. In order to load the next round, to have the chamber locked, you need to push that button. And that actually requires a person to remove their finger to enable that to happen, depending on the type.
Yeah.
And it is nothing at all like the semi-automatics. So I think that that's misinformation that might be getting out there by people that it's similar to. I don't believe that it is. One would argue that a lever action could be seen as that as well, and that there are other types of firearms that can be seen like that as well. But I think what we can come down to is they have been around for a very long time.
Okay, let's move to the budget. Yeah.
Okay. The $4.7 million of funding for the new Firearms Licensing Review Committee, what date do you expect to appoint the individuals to these roles?
We would like to see that the Firearms Licensing Review Committee is stood up and ready to go as soon as the changeover occurs. We will be advertising shortly for those positions. In fact, I think they're underway now, the advertisements for the Licensing Review Committee, in order to make sure that we have the right people in place ready to go from day one.
Is it likely to be a minister yourself, or is it Minister Goldsmith who'll be doing the appointing of those roles?
Well, the interviews for those roles will actually occur under the Ministry of Justice, and the Minister in charge of firearms will be the person that appoints those roles. So it will actually go through a process that the Ministry will undertake, and they will deliver, as they usually do, recommendations to the Minister to make the final decisions.
What checks and balances are there for the new firearms regime in terms of appointments? So will the Public Service Commission play any sort of oversight role with the new chief exec of the organisation, understanding it's a statutory appointment and not for public service? Can you just give us a bit more information on how that works?
I'm actually going to pass that over because of the serious accusations that have been personally made against me in regard to appointments within this realm. I've actually handed the entire lot over to the Ministry of Justice, so perhaps they could answer that question for you.
I can talk to that. And clearly, this committee has considered some of the submissions that came in on the firearms legislation in terms of ensuring an appropriately independent appointment process. And there are particular responsibilities given me. They've been designed to, as closely as possible, follow the public services approach. The reason that they are with the Ministry of Justice rather than the public service is that police is not a public service department, and so we've had to recreate that. I've run the process that's underway at the moment in terms of identifying a chief executive for the new agency. We have been very deliberate to follow the PSC type of process. I've actually had the Deputy State Services, Public Services Commissioner Heather Baggett on my interview panel as well. And so we've been very clear, as the Minister says, to basically bring almost exactly the same rigour and process that the Public Services Commission would bring to it, just so that it can be plenty of public confidence in the appointment.
So New Zealanders can expect to see a fair reflection of people who represent those who have an interest in firearms and public safety on that group?
I'm talking about the chief executive.
Oh, chief executive. So I was meaning like once the actual panel itself, or the new body, the representatives who are appointed onto that group, can New Zealanders expect to see a fair representation of those who have an interest in firearms?
Yeah, so I'll just be clear, the comments I was making were in relation to the chief executive. With respect to the members of the group, we would go through a process. We go through those sorts of processes across the board, and we provide advice to ministers that we give our best assessment against criteria that would cover off the sorts of things that you'd expect to see.
And who makes that final determination on who makes it onto that group?
I think the decisions will be the minister's decisions at the end of the day on, as is always the case with these sorts of appointments.
And that's Associate Justice or Justice who makes that call?
It's Associate Justice.
I would say it's probably because it says in the legislation the Minister in charge of firearms, but if there is a recommendation that appoints somebody that I may know, I will step out of that, and as I have been doing throughout this term, and that decision will fall probably onto the Minister of Justice.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just stop, because I think Evan asked another question. In terms of the criteria that you referred to for the panel, who will determine that, and would that be in line with public service PSA guidelines?
The criteria is set out in the legislation of what the 3 panel members will need to have as criteria. One of them needs to be a lawyer with legal experience over 5 years. Another one would be a licensed firearm owner, and the other one will have some sort of regulatory experience and understanding in that realm, as well as having some knowledge on firearms.
Okay. All right, cool. You're right. I'm going to go to Mr. Todd Stevenson.
Supplementary. Just staying on the topic of arms, obviously that legislation is still before this actual committee, but money has been set aside in the budget. What will, if the legislation passes, what will that money be used for? What are the next steps of, I suppose, operationalising the Arms Act if passed?
Thank you. The $44.9 million that has been allocated is specifically for the implementation of the new Arms Act regime. So that will include the discussions that we've just had on the Firearms Licensing Review Committee to make sure that we set them up really well as the separation of the regulator from the enforcer and making sure that they are up and fit for purpose as well when they run. There's agreements that will be needed to be made with New Zealand Police on purchasing services from them to ensure that there is no breakdown in services that are available, because we are still having this vote under New Zealand Police, although it's managed by the Ministry of Justice. So we need to ensure that the flow is adequate between the new regulator and New Zealand Police. So there will be some discussions that will be had between the two about some of those things that need to be picked up, and these costs will help pay for that.
Just a quick supplementary, Mr. Kibblewhite. So I assume a lot of that operational detail the minister's talking about, the planning is already underway and the ministry's overseeing all of that?
We've appointed an establishment chief executive who's with us today. Wukash is sitting behind me here. So he is stepping that through. He's working both with the ministry and with police and with the current Firearms Safety Authority, and just generally helping to shepherd that through. So we are doing we've got effectively a comprehensive work program to set this up and establish it and have it ready to go.
So just one last.
No, you go.
May I just add to that? There's also a contingency within that $44.9 million that goes towards the courts to help pay for a judge. This is because we are introducing infringement notices and we are upping the penalties as well as new offences within the Arms Act. So we're ensuring that the courts are able to be able to operate once we start enforcing some of these.
Correct. So subject to Parliament doing its work, you're confident that Justice will be able to deliver this new Arms Act regime with all the steps you've taken?
Well, we're certainly confident in the implementation process that we have underway at the moment. There will be obviously a new entity created. They will take over that mantle. There'll be a close cooperation with police, who will still be hosting that independent entity. And so potentially between the 3 agents, the new agency, the existing agency, and then police and the Ministry of Justice, yes, I'm confident that that's all on track.
Thank you.
So before we get a new topic, anyone else want to ask about the Firearms Safety Authority? So we'll put that one to bed, or do you want to, for example, I'd like to do them in groups,
That's
right?
different from safety and education.
Well, no, we can go under
If I
that.
may explain,
Yeah.
the current authority that sits within New Zealand Police is called the Firearms Safety Authority, or Te Tari Pureke. Once the transfer occurs, or we have royal assent of the bill, Firearms Safety Authority will then become Firearms Safety and Education New Zealand at that stage.
I have one question that's.
There you go. Let's finish this topic and then we'll move to new stuff.
So is there any sort of view on how that's going to operate? So I know that when that shift happens, that there won't be like police in there, but is there going to be like an MOU, or there'll be some institutional knowledge that'll be needed? Is there any more sort of detail on how the funding and all those sort of things work?
Yeah, I'll give you high level, and if there's something else that Wukash can add, then he definitely will. But yes, look, sorry, what was the question?
How will it work in practice?
How it's
Will there
gonna
be an MOU setting out terms of agreement?
Between the police.
Yes.
Is there a code of conduct for those affected and dealt with by police systems and HR? Those housed within the regulatory authority or the Ministry of Justice, which has oversight over monitoring the regulator, like all that sort of detail that we haven't seen.
Yes.
Are we able to see any of of that?
Yes, there will be agreements that will be made. We're actually working through a system of figuring out what actually needs to occur to make sure that both police have the information that they need and the new regulator have theirs as well. There'll be new police liaison team set up to work between New Zealand Police and the Firearms Safety and Education New Zealand as well. And of course, we'll be implementing a red flag system, which will bring in other government agencies so that they can look to share information. So we don't have a situation like we had in 2019, where Brenton Tarrant was able to manoeuvre his way through our legislative system without government agencies being able to have any foresight or input. So we're trying to close those gaps there, and we will make sure that that is operational. We will have firearms or arms officers working out of some police stations as well. So there'll be agreements that will need to be made between the new authority as well as New Zealand Police to make sure that they're still operational. Do you have anything to add to that, Vikesh?
So at a agency to agency level, we'll have a what's called a host agency agreement with police. So that sets out everything from real estate to desk space to corporate services and what it looks like. And we are working through at the moment with the association at the employment level what that means for folks who are currently police employees who will be FSE staff in the future. And as the Minister says, we're also working through the information sharing and data access agreements to support the right flow of information to improve public safety.
And is there any specific allocation within the budget specifically for IT? Because I know one of the fears has been that real-time intelligence for putting up red flags. Is there any additional funding in the budget to enable to make sure that the IT capability enables there to be very quick transfer of intel when required?
Yes, there is. And if you have a look at the budget lines, you'll see that there is a ICT tag contingency that has no money appropriated to it. There is money appropriated to it, but the reason why it doesn't show in the budget lines is for commercial sensitivities as they start to negotiate what those ICT upgrades will need to look like going into the future.
And is there any kind of indication about what that might be? ICT, we know, can do lots of different things for government. Is there any kind of ballpark figure? I mean, I know there's been, is it 4.7? Is it within that 4.7 that's been allocated, or is that in addition to that?
The $44.9 million that have been allocated to arms does not include anything to do with ICT, and it's not appropriate for me while the negotiations are taking place to even indicate what a figure may be at that stage. But by the time we get through that and we come back next term, we'll be able to show you exactly what those figures are.
But do you know what pot of money that would come from in the future, or that's unknown?
The money has already been set aside in a tag contingency, so the money is sitting there.
Right.
Right, I've got a supplementary from Rima Nutley.
Supplementary again, Minister and team. Just with respect to the ICT modernisation, Minister, how are we expecting that these improvements will benefit both public safety and service delivery?
Well, what we have at the moment is ICT that is not working the way that it should do. So being able to upgrade it and having it fit for purpose is going to benefit not only the licensed firearm owners, but the Firearms Safety and Education New Zealand as they take over, and also most importantly, New Zealand Police. At the moment, there are 3 different ICT systems that do not speak to each other. So the first thing we need to do is be able to pull them all together, make sure that they're safe and secure, and make sure that the relevant access is available to those that need it.
Thanks, Minister.
Okay, let's go to a new topic.
Mr. Chair, just before you move on to a new topic, I'd just like to express my thanks to the Justice Select Committee for their hard work on the firearms legislation. I understand it's been very constructive, and I'm really pleased to hear that the committee has worked so well together, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank them for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Right, Scott, do you want anything, or have you got a new line of thinking? No, not yet. Right, I'm going to go back to Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Thank you very much. How many FTEs are planned for the regulator, and how does that compare to the Firearms Safety Authority?
The way that this is going to operate is on day 1, and day 1 will be the day after Royal Assent. There will be no changes apart from those that are what I would call blue shirts. Members of New Zealand Police will be moving out of the Firearms Safety and Education. I believe there's 12 at the moment that are going through a process with New Zealand Police to integrate back into other areas within police. Everybody else will move over into the new entity.
And why don't you want police in there?
Well, this is about rebuilding trust and confidence, but it's also about making sure that police stick to their core business, which they do so well, and that's enforcement. So what we're doing is removing the regulatory and administration side of arms from New Zealand Police, giving it to this new entity and allowing New Zealand Police to solely concentrate on enforcement, which is their core business.
I think many New Zealanders would think that they do trust New Zealand Police, particularly around their institutional knowledge of firearms. Why do you take a different position to that?
And I think this is where it's really important that we still keep the police liaison team in place, because they do have some knowledge there, but they're not the only ones with knowledge. And there is no reason why the Firearms Safety Authority in the future can't start bringing in others with knowledge. Police are not the only people with knowledge about firearms, extensive knowledge. And I would argue that there are other and better experts within New Zealand that would be available.
But don't you think it's kind of doing New Zealand a disservice that if there is someone who has good knowledge on firearms and they just so happen to be a police officer, wouldn't we want to draw upon that knowledge?
Sure, you would want to, and in some respects they'll still be there. So to give you an example, new imports of new firearms will still be looked at this stage by the team of New Zealand Police, because they are the ones that already understand what it is that they're looking for. So we're not actually removing that part at this stage, because they are the experts in that field. But I'm sure that they are not the only experts in that field. So it's not about just getting rid of something for the sake of it, because public safety is still front of mind. So they will still continue to have that team. But as I mentioned before, New Zealand Police are not the only experts, and I believe there are other experts out in the community that have more knowledge than some of them.
What if someone leaves police for a while and then comes? Is that okay then?
Well, they're no longer employed by New Zealand Police,
Right.
which is a commitment that we made to the licensed firearm owners. I hear what you say about other New Zealanders, but there is a large portion of, I'll call them LFOs, within New Zealand that need that trust and confidence to be rebuilt.
And presumably there'll be a lot of senior police staff who leave the police force either because of age or other reasons, who are likely to want to be employed under the license, as it was prior to 2019 or whenever the reforms were brought.
Correct. Look, I understand at the moment that there is some that have actually left police and are employed by Firearms Safety Authority, and they are quite welcome to move over.
Yeah, okay.
What's the expected establishment date for the Firearms Safety and Education New Zealand unit?
We're hoping that we will get through legislation and have it go live, so to speak, around late September.
Late September, thank you. And I think you might have answered this, but I'll just check. Will police staff currently performing firearms licensing functions for Te Tauripuriki, will they have the opportunity to transfer to the new, or they just don't? They don't.
If they are signed up with New Zealand Police, they will not be transferring over, no.
And that's the employment issue you're dealing with at the moment in terms of police association. They'll figure out what happens.
Yes, my understanding is that they will go back into the bigger police pool and will be reallocated new jobs.
I'll go to Scott.
Do one more? Or?
One more, and then I'm going to go to Scott.
On the authority's website, recorded trust and confidence in the authority is at 65%. Has there been any modelling done to estimate an expected increase in trust and confidence with the separation of the firearms regulation from police?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Is that something you might think of doing?
I think it's something that would be really important to do into the future, because we do need to see whether or not we are achieving what we want to. I'm hearing from the firearms community that some subtle changes that have been made already is helping to establish these new baselines. It's starting to work already, and I thank Lukash, who's come in as acting chief executive, for some of the culture change that we're starting to see and some of the improvements. So I think it would be a good idea to look at that into the future, but let's get established first.
Right, Scott Willis.
I may have missed an answer you've given to this, but what are the costs of the firearm safety ICT upgrades? What are we looking at?
You did miss it. We just went through and said that we won't be giving exact figures due to commercial sensitivity, and that is the reason why you see in the budget lines an ICT tag contingency with no figures to it. That's due to commercial sensitivities, while the organisation actually starts to look to employ or contract those to come in and do that work.
Any more questions on it? No. Right. Who else wants to ask a question?
On a different topic.
Yep, let's go to a different, I think we've done that, eh? And thank you for your assistance. Right.
If I
Todd?
may say, Mr. Chair, I do have an open door policy and invite the member, if she has more questions, to come and talk to me about them. I have made that open door policy to all opposition at any stage, and I'm willing to continue that.
I did have one more, but
One more.
okay.
Okay.
It was on the ICT stuff. Will that ensure that police still have continued access to the firearms regulators information? Do police get still full access to what's in there?
Once we have that ICT set up, and we don't know what it's going to look like. So I had said to you that there are 3 different ICT workings that we have at the moment that don't speak to each other. One of them sits within police and the other 2 sit outside of police. So we need to actually understand what the new ICT is going to look like to understand whether or not police and other agencies have direct access or whether or not they get the information through the regulator. What is very important is that where police need to have real-time access, they should continue to do so, especially in very quickly evolving situations. There is no intent whatsoever to leave police out of that, but what it's actually going to look like will depend on what the ICT solution looks like, and whether or not it's direct access or whether it's by agreement, depending on what the ICT actually looks like once it's
Okay,
been
well, hopefully we're going to something like AML or something
Adoption,
like
I was going to.
that. Adoption.
Is that okay? Is that okay, Minister? I'm going to do adoption.
Thank you.
It was either that or AML, but I've decided to go with adoption. Yes, I want to obviously talk about what this budget sets aside for this new adoption. Again, it's like legislation that's obviously before Parliament. Obviously, you know, the government, and again, want to acknowledge, obviously, the opposition stepped in last year, closed this quite serious loophole, which could allow, some various serious things to happen around adoption. Just what have you got planned going forward? How does this budget support your work in the adoption area so that we really do have a robust adoption regime and we are living up to good international standards?
Thank you for that question. The budget for what we're doing in the adoption system will come about from the main budget that has been allocated to the Ministry of Justice. But it is really important that we do make the changes that we have indicated. When we put through the temporary piece of legislation that stopped international adoptions from occurring under the current process, we did say that we would look to have a more firmer, relevant piece of legislation that will ensure that the children that are coming in from overseas will be protected. So there is now that replacement bill sitting with the Justice Select Committee, and we need to ensure that what goes through the court system, what goes through the DIA as an example, and the Minister for Immigration is able to look after and protect those children. So there are some minor changes that we're making in the way that the adoption of children will be progressed, but quite frankly, no matter what it costs, it should be paid for, because looking after the children, especially children coming into New Zealand, we should be ensuring that their health and safety is maintained. More importantly, ensuring that those people some of them with really bad criminal conviction lists should not be able to get children in from overseas. So the budget line is a part of the bigger Ministry of Justice budget allocation. But from my point of view, whatever it costs will be worth it if we save these children.
And just a quick supplementary. And so Justice is leading this work, but then it's obviously got to coordinate with DIA, immigration and others.
Yes, they do. Just to make sure that it all works well and everybody is able to do their little bit, because some of the changes we're making is a little bit in immigration, it's a little bit in the courts. We need to make sure that it all comes together. But Ministry of Justice will be paying for their bit in it.
Thank you.
Can I
Right, I've got a supplementary from the Honourable Dr. Duncan Ware.
just invite the minister to talk about the surrogacy work as well in that tranche reform? I know there's a lot of people who are very interested to know what's happening in that space to get some certainty around, it's a pretty personal arrangement.
Yes. Yes, the surrogacy, and I thank the committee once again for the work on the surrogacy bill, because it's been going for quite some time. The committee will know that it is a very complicated piece of legislation. It's only just been reported back. So at the moment, it's sitting on the order paper. It's not a piece of legislation that I'm going to be looking at between now and the end of term, purely because it is so complicated. And we do have quite a large number or areas of work that we are trying to get finished before the end of the term. We have less than 3 months, and I think the surrogacy bill actually needs more than a quick rush to try and get it through, especially when the committee has sat with it for so many years. I think it deserves better contemplation than a rush job.
Right, thank you.
Right, Rima Nakle with another supplementary.
Supplementary, Minister, about the adoption work. As you know, and as I recall, swift work was done because from what I recall from your conversations with the House, is that there was information and evidence that was provided to you that was extremely alarming and disturbing, and you needed to act to protect children. Minister, with the work that's being done, how are we going to be able to measure that that protection is taking place?
Well, I don't know whether or not it's a measure, or perhaps a measure could end up being that we don't see these arrests of people. What's really important is that we stop these people with criminal convictions actually adopting the children in the first place and bringing them through into New Zealand. So I don't know if the team actually have measures in place for it, but I would have thought that actually not having the number of convictions and prosecutions that we're currently seeing will be a very good measure that we've got it into the right place. I also feel that if we can ensure that the children that are coming into New Zealand from overseas are coming from places where we have the same sort of controls. So for example, Hague Convention, the countries that have signed up to the Hague Convention, then we know that within their own home countries, they are applying really good, robust measures to ensure that children being adopted to overseas parents are being adopted to the right people. We had a gap in our law, and that gap has been there for quite a few decades, is my understanding. But some of the heinous type of stories that we were hearing, the prosecutions, the convictions that we were seeing most recently over a couple of years indicated to me, as a mother of 4, I cannot stand back and just let this continue. As subsequent governments have, we needed to do something, and so I acted decisively and quickly.
And just a quick supplementary, please. Minister, I know that you said that there was a gap. There is a gap, but maybe this is for the team as well. How did we miss the mark and allow so many people with very serious convictions to be able to adopt children? Is it because of this gap?
I think because of the way the system was designed and was set up and working, those cases weren't necessarily ones that the system had eyes on. Because they were coming through this route of intercountry adoption, it meant that many of the roles that other agencies would play in a domestic adoption weren't in play. And so the way that the system worked allowed that to happen. And as Minister said, they were showing up as sideways through people reporting more like labour exploitation and trafficking. And it was showing up in that space rather than through adoption. So adoption was being used, but it was showing up elsewhere. So
Thank you.
Was joining the dots.
There's a general comment there about the stewardship of legislation. So the Ministry of Justice is a department with over 150 acts that we're looking after 50 different regulatory systems. And we're actually recognising we need to be much more systematic at building a frame of how well all of that legislation is dealing with the challenges that it's designed for. And so Caroline and her team are going through a process, including building much stronger relationships with universities and practitioner communities across those different regulatory regimes.
Sounds like a case of AI. Beautiful example of using AI, I imagine.
There'll be some opportunities for AI, but I'd caution from over-relying on it in that sort of situation.
All right. Hey, now, any more on the adoption bit? Right, we're happy with that, members? Right, now we're going to go to a new topic with Camilla Village.
Minister, you've introduced a bill, the sale and supply of alcohol, improving alcohol regulation amendment bill, and I understand there'll be budgetary implications for the progress of that bill as it moves through the House. And this is kind of related to that question about the joining up of legislation. One of the criticisms that we've heard about that bill is the fact that the bill, although it focuses on alcohol regulation, may be in some instances inconsistent with the object of the primary piece of legislation, which is its amending, which is the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, and that's in relation to the focus on minimising harm and caused by alcohol consumption. So that's been a very that's been a strong criticism that we've received on that legislation as we've been looking at it. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
I have considered the sale and supply of alcohol bill with the Justice team, looking at some of the red tape around businesses and whether or not it's justified in the way that it is. We found that some of it was not, that in fact it was costing more money to business, including businesses not being able to guarantee that they could operate year to year. Businesses being shut down with those wanting to object to renewals and those objections not even coming from within New Zealand or coming from within the same island. So while I wanted to ensure that the objectors still had the ability to object, they needed to be relevant to the area that they were objecting in, because we were getting case studies showing that there were objections that were just coming in for the sake of it. So I do not believe that I have done anything within the legislation that will create more alcohol harm. I've tried to balance it in a way where it became fairer on the businesses that were trying to operate, but also allowed the community that were or are going to be impacted by alcohol sales to be able to still have their fair say. And this is why it's important to also let the community or remind the community that those that are out there helping people to do their objections, they're still available to help them. What we are suggesting is that those that can object should object from that territorial authority or within a kilometre of the territorial authority's line. So I don't believe that we are creating more harm. I think we're creating more opportunity. We're doing some really good common sense things like allowing zero alcohol within bars, which hasn't been potentially allowed in some cases. And I think that this is a good thing to get New Zealand moving without creating more harm.
Just a quick supplementary to this, and this might be more for the team that's assisting you. Many of the parts of that bill, I think it's arguable to say that there may lead to a increased either consumption in some instances, and that's in the specific allowance for alcohol to be served in areas where it wasn't previously, and also that possibly the changes may result in fewer licenses renewals being, initial licenses or renewals being declined. Is there evidence that greater consumption of alcohol in a wider sense leads to alcohol harm? What does the evidence say about that?
I wonder if it's a question we might answer in writing to you, because there's a bit of nuance in there. It'll be good to get right. There's different ways in which you measure alcohol harm, whether it's at that population level, and so there's particular measures when you look at harm at a population level, and then there's particular demographic groups in the way that you can measure harm. So it's not a simple answer. And I would rather answer that very accurately, if that's okay.
Okay.
What I can point out though is that between October 2025 and February 2026, we had 1,000 less incidents of victims involved in alcohol-related violence. So we're seeing the trend of consumption coming down and the trend of violence also coming down.
Right, Todd Stevenson's
Just
got a,
supplementary, just on Mel Belch's kind of line of questioning. In the bill, isn't there some areas like same-day delivery where actually it's introducing a regulatory regime that doesn't exist today and actually strengthening protections?
Correct. I mean, some of the concerns that we had heard from the public was around those same-day deliveries or rapid deliveries of alcohol. So we wanted to ensure that we don't just have people drunk getting more alcohol very, very quickly. So we have included within the bill the fact that a delivery driver must not deliver to somebody who is already intoxicated and that they must ensure that the person is over the age of 18. There are some companies, and I won't name them because I'm not sure if I can, but some companies that are actually already doing this. And one of the things that I've heard from them, from two companies in particular, is that if they do turn up to a home to deliver alcohol and somebody is drunk or they're not 18 years old, that they can remove that or not deliver it, so to speak, and take it back to the bottle store and they'll still be paid. So no one's missing out there except for maybe the underage drunk.
right, we've got one last topic, AML, and Mr. Carl Bates is going to put you on the rack for that.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the work around AML and the removal of red tape that is going to achieve. What is there covered in this budget to allow for the rollout of the legislation that's been going through the House?
Yes, well, the AML legislative changes that we're making are quite huge. They're really big. You won't see a specific byline for AML because, again, it will come under the justice budget. But hey, look, what we've done is 3 pieces of legislation have already gone through, and we have one more that's still coming, and that will be quite substantial. But we're also looking at how we're going to fund it. So we have already looked at a national strategy. We are working in partnership with everybody that's involved with this as well to ensure that when we do have this national strategy levy regime come into force, that everybody's happy with how it's actually operating. We don't want to be doing things to business. We need to work with business. And with AML, we all know that things evolve very, very quickly. I mean, we have different ways of being able to launder money, and making sure that everybody is working together in a realm that is effective for them is going to be very, very important as we move through these regulatory changes.
So the policy work that you've got coming that's covered under this budget period, is that going to further reduce the compliance impact on business across New Zealand?
Yes, that's right. I am currently working on a 4th bill. Hopefully, I will have this finished and ready to be introduced before the end of the term. But as I earlier mentioned, the Justice team have one of the highest amount of work. So you'll know this.
We know.
Justice Committee going through. So actually trying to make sure that they can get that work done so I can have it introduced. But we have already put through 3 pieces of legislation, which is a really good start. Not only that, it means that we will look a lot better when we are evaluated with the Financial Action Task Force looking to get that mutual evaluation underway next year. We've made some really good changes, mitigating some risk, again, removing unnecessary red tape. And what's most important is for the man on the street being able to understand his compliance is actually there to keep him safe, not to just box tick, which is currently what's happening over and over again for some people.
Thank you.
Well, that is a glorious conclusion. So I want to thank the Minister. I want to thank everyone who's come this afternoon. We are about to hear from the next Minister, but I'd like to thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff,
Tony.
You've got Helen Clark coming in, but I see Dan. Helen White, did you say?
Helen
What happened to you, Mr. Minister, lovely to have you with us this afternoon. I've got to say that you are last but not least. Some of your colleagues beside you we've seen before, some repeatedly, some can't stay out of this room. But anyway, it's nice that you're here. So we've got 45 minutes. Obviously, you'll do a short introduction and then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a privilege to be able to come and speak to the work across government in a space that often isn't spoken about enough. The conversation around family harm and sexual violence is often a hidden problem in our country, and the more that we can bring this issue into the forefront of New Zealanders, the better. So beside me is Andrew Kibblewhite, the Secretary for Justice and Chair of the Interagency Executive Board, and Cam Shirley, the Acting Chief Executive of the Centre. I also have officials from New Zealand Police, MSD, Corrections, Oranga Tamariki, ACC, and the Social Investment Agency representing the core agency partners for the board. So if there are any questions that you would like to have around those agencies, there is someone here to be able to answer those questions. I'm responsible for the Centre for Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence and the Interagency Executive Board. The vote amounts to roughly $20 million per annum. What I can't do as the Minister is direct how board agencies spend their money. I can set expectations on them to work together with a system view and to consider implications of operational decisions. And I'm strengthening those accountabilities through development of key performance indicators moving forward. From the vote of about 20 million per annum, approximately 20% goes towards community organisations, about $4.3 million in 26 to 27. Much of that is the involvement in the multi-agency responses to family violence. The Centre's activities support the board and agencies to coordinate the all-of-government approach. The latest version of Te Ao Rerekura identifies the system shifts that were needed and how they need to be achieved through successive action plans. This is not a short-term plan, this is a long-term plan, and it doesn't matter which government is in place. I'm sure that everybody across this table wants to see better outcomes and breaking that cycle of harm. So that's my biggest focus. The current action plan has prioritised 3 focus areas: investing in commission services, keeping people safe through strengthened multi-agency responses, and stopping violence. Each of these requires a sustained focus from successive governments, building on each step to achieve the change. I'm also concerned about the increasing complexity of sexual violence, and I know that a well-trained and capable workforce is critical to caring for survivors and preventing reoffending. I think I'll leave it open to questions because I think it's more important to answer the questions than go through this in depth.
Nice.
But what I would say is it's been an absolute privilege for myself over the last 2.5 years to go up and down the country, speak to organisations that may not necessarily have ever had a voice at the table, speak to victims of violence, victims of sexual assault, and hear their experiences of the system, and being able to have that opportunity to make those changes is an absolute privilege.
Thank you, Minister. We've got some new members. I would ask that you ask questions in the context of the budget. I'm going to start off with Helen White.
Thank you. We have a real phenomenon out there at the moment in sexual violence, and that's the strangulation issue. When I talk to people who are in this sector, they tell me that very few people engaging in this behaviour know how harmful it is and what injury it is doing. What are you doing in the funding this year to focus on what is a really scary phenomenon in terms of educating people as to the dangers of that practice?
Yeah, education is really important, and I absolutely agree that strangulation has been brought front and centre because of the law change, which made that a specific focus in legislation around strangulation, because the harm that is caused by that is just unacceptable. Also had conversations with MedSAC, whose job it is to show up and actually take the evidence around strangulation, and making sure that we have a plan moving forward, that we have enough resources for MedSAC to be able to actually get in front of these victims. So there's two areas. There's crisis, when we actually need somebody there, when somebody's come forward with strangulation, and there's also education. So I will hand over to Cam to have a conversation around a plan on keeping people safe, and what we are currently doing across agencies, and if there's any other agency that wants to speak to this in the form of education.
Perhaps just addressing sexual violence to start with. You know, we know this is a really complex space and it's moving very fast in terms of some of the behaviours and some of the norms that we're starting to see emerge. Minister's been clear with us, based on our own advice as well, that sexual violence needs elevation in terms of our broader priorities. So the Minister outlined, you know, the three initial priorities: investing, commissioning well, keeping people safe through multi-agency responses, and stopping violence. We are, over the next year, just preparing some advice around what an increased focus in sexual violence might look like, as well as workforce capability, which is a really important part of that as well. We've recently released and published some sexual violence capability frameworks, which really set the standards for both organisations and workforces to ensure that you know, we are serving people as we need to and providing the necessary supports out there.
I'm not hearing anything concrete. Can you tell me something that is going on that is concrete, because it's so desperate? Thank you. I just want to acknowledge you actually answered this question, or a similar question, last time when we were in here, and I really appreciated your candidness about the seriousness of the issue. So I'm very interested in your participation.
Oh, thank you. I feel like a frequent flyer today. So firstly, you're right, it is a serious issue, and actually this is not a new issue. That's the first thing with family harm. Since the legislation has come into being, what it's actually enabled us to do is actually action it and call it for what it is. So we've really welcomed that, which is why there was actually so much lobbying to get it through. What we've done is, if we talk about it from just a response rate, and you know, the amount of family harm investigations that we carry out each year is significant. So we have trained all our staff in relation to strangulation, and of the significant number of family harm events and investigations that we do every year, this is one of the key areas that we're looking for. I think, to your point, and you are very well versed in this, we know that we have to identify, we have to interview the victims, we have to ask them specific questions about strangulation, because it is such a warning flag for more serious offending, i.e. could lead to homicide. So it is something that we are actively doing in our response. It is something that we are actively doing in our investigations. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any other questions. Probably what I would say, though, it's also, you know, a bookend, because strangulation is part of a far wider remit for the family harm scenario. Even if we go back to, you know, just the stalking and harassment, you know, that was brought in recently. So the more tools we have, the more legislation we have to enact it, that's actually a good thing. But the training and the training framework that has been led out from the centre, I mean, I can only, I'll speak on behalf of our agency, but we have literally trained over 10,000 people, and we keep doing that in our family harm courses. And so strangulation is significant for all of those courses for our frontline.
And it's also about supporting the community organisations and kind of that safety framework response when you do have somebody coming through your door that has been through, whether it be strangulation, sexual assault, rape, that they have an appropriate response to that and can be able to speak to exactly what you're talking to, what is the harm that's being caused, what medical advice have you had considering the harm that it might cause medically, and who they can put that person in front of. So it's about also training the response of community and agencies. So it's not just about training government, it's about training agencies and how to give the right information to those people who are walking through their door who have suffered from strangulation.
So, Minister, this exposes part of the conversation we had last time was about the blurring of the lines, that there are young women in particular consenting to this behaviour. And in fact, the harm it's doing causes things like dementia. And that there is very little knowledge in young men or young women, and probably older ones at this point, about the dangers of what they're doing. What educational tools are we using in this space? For example, I have suggested to you, Minister, that we look at ACC doing a rollout on this and educating. What are we putting in resource-wise in this budget to education in this space that's wide, that shocks people into understanding the harm that is being done?
There are many programs across many agencies where they are focusing on education in those spaces. I'm not over all the education programs, but there may be someone from ACC here that can speak to some work that they've been doing. It might not necessarily be in the specific strangulation space, but in the education space around harm and how to respond to harm.
If you want to say something, just come on up.
Yeah. Oh, kia ora. Not specific, no specific education programs on specifically strangulation, but what we have recently done is released a campaign called Little Matters, which is a toolkit for parents and providers that gives them tools and strategies so that they can incorporate them in their day-to-day practical lives to prevent child sexual abuse. So that's one of the initiatives that we've recently published.
Okay,
in terms of one educational
I might
program.
move on to that issue that you're talking about from you've given me the in on it, but I am concerned that strangulation itself, it needs a program around this, and I'd urge the Minister to consider getting one.
I
Yes.
mean, as the board, we will be bringing advice in relation to what we're doing across sexual violence. That Minister's been clear that she expects us in the next iteration of the action plan to be putting a stronger focus on sexual violence.
Yeah.
So as we bring that advice up, we'll be looking at strangulation.
Fantastic.
Before you change, I just want to make sure we finish this topic, right? So I just, Assistant Commissioner, you said with the change of the law, it gave the police the opportunity to charge people to, call it for what it was. What I was just keen to do is get a bit of feedback in terms of what that's meant from police prosecutions or the way you're going about dealing with offenders. I'm trying to get empirical evidence, what it has meant.
So on that, actually, I've just asked for some numbers so we can get back to you, apologies, on the actual prosecution numbers. But look, what it actually means is because, I mean, we know and you all know, it is such a risk. It's a flag. And so what it's enabled us to do is actually go and investigate, look for the total evidence, talk about what's actually happened, because we don't, family violence encompasses so much.
Yeah.
Within the realms of family violence, if we want to break it down, you have child abuse, sexual child abuse, you have rapes, you have significant serious injuries. And whilst we're working really hard in the multi-agency space, because we're bookending it, right? In fact, more than in my 35 years, more than I've actually ever seen before of us coming together and working together to bookend it, to actually prevent it, to reduce the serious incidents, to have that harm de-escalation. But the reality is it's still happening across this country way too much. So what it enables frontline responders to do, whether we are constables or investigators, is to go in and look at the totality and to work really hard on that investigation. And what it's enabled us to do is where there is strangulation, we can actually charge for it and the appropriateness. So that's where we're sitting. And Sir, I can get you the numbers later on this afternoon.
All right, if you can do that, that would be great. Just any more questions on strangulation before Helen goes on to something new? Right, okay, Helen, let's
Great. I want to go to that space. It probably is, whoever can stay at the table, work it out.
Yeah, just stay there, guys.
It was the issue arose of child abuse, and we're seeing this new phenomenon. The internet is so dangerous. One of the things that I have been particularly concerned about is the ordering up of child abuse overseas. And there is basically now a market for this stuff. 500,000 Filipino children last year were abused. As my understanding is, it's 500,000 where people in other countries like New Zealand have been ordering up that abuse, and it has been happening and they've been paying for it on the internet. And we have also children in New Zealand exposed to things that are absolutely horrifying. What space and what is going on in that space, given that this is violence, this is sexual violence, and prevention of it is the name of the game here.
The member has alighted on two of the issues that the board has been particularly focused on this year and that we're thinking about in the context of the next iteration of the action plan, the sexual violence more generally and the online harm. So with both of those, what the centre has done is prepared an overview of current work programs and of the stats as we understand them. And we're now going through the process as we think about the next iteration of the action plan about what we would put in that. We haven't yet finalised what will be in the next version of the action plan, but again, the online harm, and particularly for children, is something that would feature in that.
Yes, you look like you've got an answer. No?
I don't know whether I've got an answer. I've definitely got an opinion on it. So child exploitation online has been something that actually internationally and globally we have been trying to confront for like well over a decade. And so the first thing, to your point, this is not a New Zealand issue. This is global child exploitation, which takes many forms actually. And the more we go online, the more the exploitation can be. So for example, with police, we've had our online child exploitation team has been going for well over a decade. I can't give you it. And our staff there do a fantastic job, as do DIA. And that is why it's so imperative that we link, and there is a global network of enforcement and agencies who are grappling this, the AI ability and the IT technology to actually identify these images that can go all around the world, the investigation technique to actually identify what country they're in, sometimes what village they're in, and then to have the response is significant. And it's a growing presence. But I probably just want to say this is probably an area, if we're talking child exploitation online, that we actually have been working and building our skills with, not only here, but across the world.
Yeah. I
guess if we're going to be speaking to moving forward, that will always be something that is invested in. But if we speak to a realistic thing that I've actually feel like we've made a real difference and a change, and it may not just be in the online space, but it's in the space of protecting children who may be trafficked around the country. You'll notice the changes that we did in the adoption space, where we saw that there was a gap in the adoptions legislation that allowed children to be moved around the world using our Adoptions Act to enable that to happen. So when I'm seeing things that in New Zealand where I can make a real change and know that it's going to protect children, I will advocate in that space. But as Tasha said, this has been a long-term issue that will be constantly invested in.
What I would be concerned about, and it's good work, and it's amazing that people even can handle doing that work. It's so traumatic, but that's all ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. What are we doing to stop that material even occurring? Do we need to start to come down hard on the technologies, given that those tools also allow for this material to be identified and prevented from being created? Basically, there's a market and we're allowing that market to occur.
Mr. Chair, can I just be really clear that the centre actually, within this budget, isn't responsible for that specific funding. We can put together a plan and a work program, which I'm responsible for, is leading the direction of the areas that we would like agencies to be focusing on. But there isn't anything in the budget specifically for technologies in that space.
I'm clear on that, Minister, but
I just want
it's
to make,
about
I
what
know
you're
you
doing
might
to
be
advise.
clear, but
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that the people listening
Yeah.
are clear.
I'm
that
glad
it
you've done
doesn't
that
fall within the
clarification. We'll
budget.
just have this one
Yeah.
response. I think the Assistant Commissioner.
You know, I think the key thing is, just because an issue has been around a long period of time, I'd hate anyone to think that anyone was apathetic to it, you know, and so to your point, you know, it is a challenge getting things taken offline when online is so visible. But even today, you know, our police commissioner is in London. You know, he spent the day meeting with Google and other platforms. We are constantly, and it's not just police, but from an enforcement perspective, we're making sure that we've got the right international partnerships to be having the right conversations, because actually this is an all of us issue. And so we are doing that. We are actively doing that across New Zealand and global, particularly around the child exploitation. But yeah.
Right, now I'm going to go to the Honourable Marama Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, Minister,
Kia ora.
and all of the team. I really took on board your genuine concern at the opening of your kōrero. I know how much this means to you. I know how much this work means to you, and I've always been really clear about that. I also know how much this work means to the departments and agencies across Parliament, across government. And that's why I'm quite concerned that there hasn't been, over the 3 years of this government, any additional funding, any new funding in any of the 2024, 25 or 26 budget. It has become clear that even at the moment, there is a proposal to cut 26 key roles at the centre. The centre, which ultimately was to provide an overview and a level of accountability distinctly for violence prevention that was not in existence beforehand. And so I'm wanting to ask the Minister, how is she able to reconcile this work as a priority when she has received no additional funding in any of this government's budget, but in fact has faced funding cuts from previously allocated funding to this really crucial work?
And I understand and really respect the question. But what I would say is the review on the centre is not about saving money or cutting back on this important work. The process was commissioned by the Executive Board, and it was not about reducing FTEs, but it was or meeting a target or baseline savings. So I just want to make that very clear. This was about ensuring that the board and the centre are focused on the system being effective, well coordinated, and delivering an impact in our communities. We've known for a while that there is not enough accountability across agencies when it comes to this space.
Absolutely.
I think we've had conversations in meetings together around this, and how do we create better accountability? I think the centre sometimes became a distraction where they were the focus, and other agencies would assume that the centre would take care of this stuff, and that was not, from my understanding, the intent of the centre. The centre was there to support agencies into making informed decisions around where they move forward. And the board was created so that you could have an around table of all the executives that have a role to play in this space, talking to each other and making sure that when they were making decisions in this space, that they were making it as a whole of the systems approach rather than a siloed approach. Unfortunately, the centre's scope widened. And there was a bit of a confusion about what was the purpose of the centre. This came from the sector itself. up and down the country, having conversations with the sector, not really understanding what the centre's role was. So this has no final decisions have been made around what the centre is going to look like, but the discussion is how can we make the centre as efficient as possible to support agencies to make really informed decisions and choices. So over the last 2 years, the centre has done some pretty amazing work at building the foundation of what we currently have. So when I say that, I mean, we did not have a very good view of where our money was going and where we were spending it and whether we were having an effective outcome in our communities. The centre has been able to draw together the data from across the whole of government to have a real clear understanding of where our direct spend in family harm and sexual violence is going. We are able to now break that down into sexual violence or family harm spend. We are able to break that down now into regions. What is our spend in the regions and what kind of outcome are we having in those regions? Now that we have that clear framework of where we've started, we can make really informed decisions moving forward. In regards to contracts, I have not been made aware, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, of a single agency that has had a current contract stopped. What I've been made aware of is there were a lot of contracts that had time-limited funding that came to an end, and a decision had to be made by agencies whether that time-limited funding was going to become business as usual or whether they were going to redirect their focus into a different space. And that is the current process that is happening. So I think we have to be very clear rather than just saying cuts, that time-limited funding is not a guarantee for future funding, and we have to make really informed decisions.
Thank you, Minister.
Were you going to say something, Mr. Kabor?
If I might, I want a couple of points. The first issue on the funding issues. As far as the centre goes, we've actually looked to protect the centre from the specific funding cuts that other agencies have experienced, and even the change proposal that's underway at the moment. It does generate some savings, but those savings are not an obligation from outside, and they will stay within the centre. So they will give more leverage to the board to be able to deploy those funds. So the other part of the funding, as the Minister sets out, the centre's done a lot of really good work at understanding the landscape of where the funding's gone. It's working closely with the Social Investment Agency across those areas of government activity. Family violence and sexual violence is one of the things that gets taken into account. So there hasn't been big increases specifically coming for family and sexual violence, but that's absolutely been taken into account when resource allocations have been looked at across the board. And within the centre, we've actually looked to protect the resources around the centre from the small kind of incremental cuts that most agencies, including the Ministry of Justice, have had to deal with. As far as the change proposal, I mean, the Minister has described it well. It is a change proposal that's underway at the moment, and it isn't a reflection on the quality of the people in there or the calibre of the work that they have done. I just would really acknowledge that. I think the centre has a strong record of achievement. But when the board did the review actually reaffirmed the first thing it says is if we didn't have something like this, we would need to create something like this because of the need for agencies across government to work more effectively together. But it went on to say, as the Minister has said, that we have lost some of the focus around those core functions, which are fundamentally the same as when the board was established in the first place. We need a board that can hold, the agencies can hold each other to account and do that with quite a sharp focus. We need a board that can be getting quite strategic advice, such as we talked about already in sexual violence and online harm. So there is a sort of an analytical, strategic brain kind of function that we need there. And we really need to be strengthening the work of the other agencies to do their line delivery. So that's very much the intent of the review. As I say, it's out for consultation at the moment. The staff there and others are giving feedback on it, and we'll have to reflect on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Staying with efficacy then of investment and resources, which of course are precious, but in light of pressures on other agencies, the very agencies that you have an overview across, and in light of what we're hearing from across the country and community and frontline organisations who are feeling funding cuts, not the least respected in Wellington, Sexual Violence Prevention and Specialists, the only one in the Wellington region, and one of the few in the country. Can the minister, however, in light of a really constrained fiscal environment, what assurances can the minister give that we can ensure that the centre or the work more broadly has the capability across its Māori, Pacific and ethnic workforces? And particularly, I believe your officials were talking about the monitoring and reporting system performance. And for some people, that might not feel like frontline impacts, but it's crucial for efficacy. Can the minister give some assurances that those sort of guarantees across the work will be able to be upheld?
Yeah, and that's why one of the focuses was really around workforce capacity and capability, and actually encouraging agencies to support community to build up their capacity and capabilities, because that's so important that community feels like they are supported in that space. There are many areas that we are doing that. We're doing that in the form of micro-credentials. I'm actually off this afternoon to celebrate one of the first graduations of a Pacifica micro-credential in Auckland, because we need to make sure that we are, where we see gaps, where agencies don't feel so confident in certain spaces, especially sexual violence. It's raised with me up and down the country that some agencies are very confident in the family harm space, but when it comes to sexual violence, they will provide services, but the confidence isn't as high. So as in my role, everything that I do, I would expect agencies when they're making changes around the family violence, sexual violence space, where we are pivoting and prioritising our spend, that they are bringing those changes to the board for discussion first, around the board, and Andrew Kibblewhite can probably speak to that more. But it's not and my role is not about specifically making decisions for individual agencies. It's about advocating to make sure that every decision, when funding discussions are made, are done with te ao ririkura and the focus areas of the second action plan in mind. And definitely it's around strengthening that workforce across agencies and community.
Let's move on. More questions? Is there another question?
One more little
Yeah, you
one.
go for it. All right, and then I'll go
Thank you.
supplementary.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Is the minister confident that this government really does continue to prioritise violence prevention?
Absolutely.
In the budget?
In this budget, absolutely. In the budget for the centre, the focus is now around, now that we have this information, now that we have a real good understanding, even region by region, and I think it's really important to express that we now know our prevention spend and our crisis spend. We now know our family harm spend and our sexual violence spend. And if we have a good understanding in our regions of what the areas of harm are, we can refocus and reprioritise to make sure we're having a really focused decision making, a region by region, rather than just trying to guess.
Right. So Camilla Village.
Yeah, just on this the change program in the Centre for Family Violence and Sexual Violence, don't you think it's pretty cold comfort to those about approximately 1/3 of the staff there who are facing losing their positions, to hear that they've been protected from other government cuts, and bearing in mind that some of these people are specialists who do deal with quite significant matters in the family and sexual violence matter?
There's no doubt that change processes, especially when jobs are in question, are difficult and traumatic. So it probably is very cold comfort to staff to hear me say that the budget has been protected, yet we are looking to make some savings in there. What I would say about the staff is that they're really committed to this kaupapa. I've had a range of feedback, but but very little of it is saying that there wasn't some opportunity to sharpen up the way the centre functions and how it's working. But I think the staff are processing that at the moment, and we'll get quite a range of views through this consultation process.
Just finally, is it really realistic though to say that there's not going to be an impact on the work that is done if such a significant number of roles are going to be potentially at risk?
Well, I mean, the challenge is through this process is for us to understand that we will be creating a little bit of additional resource that can be deployed in other spaces, and so that other deployment will generate opportunities to do other things that we're not currently doing. So on balance, the board's view is that there is opportunity to tighten up the range of work that we do out of the centre, bring it back to its core initial purpose, which is around holding the agencies to account. It's around helping chart the direction of where we go from here, and it's about supporting the line agencies often through accountability and clarity to do the work that they have to do, as opposed to, as the Minister said, sometimes I think the centre may have looked to compensate for other agencies, and I don't think that's actually helping the system as a whole function better. We're still having that conversation. I'm going into it with, obviously we've done some work, we've done a review. We've been very transparent with the team about what that looks like, and there will be feedback on it. So I'm open to receiving that feedback and coming up with arrangements that are as effective as possible.
Right, Mr. Todd Stevenson, going to take us into new territory.
I am new territory. In the Minister, in your opening, you talked about developing KPIs, key performance indicators. Does that relate to the centre, the board, both? What do you kind of see happening in that space? And maybe kind of flows a little bit onto what Mr. Kibblewhite was saying, because I'm assuming the board, Mr. Kibblewhite, has its own set of KPIs, because you do want to obviously hold the individual agencies jointly responsible for delivering things. But maybe just talk a bit more about that, because I'm interested in what they might look like.
It's about probably both.
Yeah.
But with the board, I think for a long time, there's been a discussion around accountability for the board and making sure that they are doing what was intended. And sometimes things can happen where maybe it hasn't met the whole of board's expectations, and there has to be some KPIs set in that space. So that's what I'm working through at the moment around how do we put KPIs in place. It may not necessarily be myself putting those KPIs in place. It might be the Minister in charge of those agencies setting a KPI specifically for those board members.
And obviously, is the idea of that to try and drive this joint responsibility? Yes. And again, it may be Mr. Kawai, but kind of comment from your perspective after the Minister about how you view it, because obviously you're leading the board.
Yeah. Ministers are very clear across all these agencies that the siloing has to stop. But we also have the conversation with the community is the same. But we can't sit here as ministers and tell the community to stop siloing and to work together if we're not leading by example in government. So I often say changing legislation and regulation in this space is the easy part, but changing practice and culture can be quite difficult. So it's about setting clear expectations about how we want to work moving forward, which is as a system as a whole, rather than individual siloed decision making. So there will be room for KPIs to set those accountabilities.
Yeah. Right.
I'd say measuring joined upness is notoriously hard.
Yeah.
You don't want to just measure meetings or meeting attendance or anything like that.
Heaven forbid.
No.
Heaven forbid. But so I think it's actually a really hard question, but I'd answer it at several levels. One is that we do publish overall outcome measures, and we've just published in the last probably month, and that was for the preceding 18 months, and that's going to be every 2 years we will keep publishing that. So that frames the overall performance in family violence and sexual violence, and that tells a really interesting story. So, that gives us some comfort that some things are moving in the right direction. It also identifies some areas where progress is proving challenging. But, to say that all comes to the performance of the board is a bit of a long bow. The next level is at the action plan level, and that's where this Minister and her predecessor have been clear that you need action plans and that those action plans should track what we collectively hold each other to account for. And we've actually done really well against the action plan that has been in place, and we're coming to the end of the action plan under Minister Chaw's leadership. And so part of the work that we're doing at the moment is saying, well, because it's designed to be essentially rolling action plans, what should the next iteration of that action plan look like? And that goes to some of the conversation we've already had and some of the areas we think we will shift the focus to. But so that at that point, we'll then be looking, and holding, as we have with the last action plan, how are we delivering against that? And that's probably our best sense of what we're doing collectively, because that doesn't in any way capture all of the activity that agencies do, but it captures the things that we identify are most important to be able to give a cohesive, coherent effort. And so that would be the primary way that we would hold each other to account.
Okay, I've got a quick supplementary from Rima Nakle, and then I'm going to finish with Helen White with a new line of questioning.
Supplementary, thank you. Welcome, Minister. Notwithstanding the name elimination of family and sexual violence, would you say at this stage there is a clarity of purpose from the board and everyone involved? Or are these actions like setting these new KPIs and the action plan helping to achieve more of a clarity of purpose in terms of how we're going to reach the elimination of
So I was very clear when I first came into this role that elimination is an excellent goal to try and have, but it's a long way away. And so with the second action plan, the focus, and you'll see the title of the second action plan, is actually breaking the cycle of violence, because with each and every person that we get in front of and we help, we are breaking that cycle of violence, which will lead to eventually, hopefully, close to eliminating the harm that's going on in our communities. But the ultimate goal that we focus on is breaking that cycle of harm with everything that we're doing across agencies. And every service we provide, every service that we're commissioning, the focus needs to be around, does it fit into the 7 focus areas of the Te Aorere Kura Action Plan? And are we making sure that we're measuring the outcomes of that investment, which is why the social investment agency work has been so important.
Okay, now Helen White's going to bring us home.
Thank you. Project Veto was something that was cancelled. $5 million has been returned. It's an incredibly important idea to centralise and to make sure that there's that kind of information sharing. We're back to manual processes, as I understand it, which are pretty seriously risky. Can you tell me where are we at with a replacement for this, and what's happening in terms of funding that kind of work?
Ultimately, this conversation was had with the board because it's all of systems approach, and I wasn't given the assurances from the board that they would support moving forward with Project Veto. So it was agreed that now is not the right time to progress with this technology project, and it will be reviewed and revisited in the future. So what I would say though is all the work that has been done is there, it won't be lost, but moving forward with a massive technology project, I wasn't given the assurances that I would be supported in doing that. I'm advised that the total spend of Project Veto over the past 2 years has been around $2 million. However, this resulted in not just work on the technology project, but the non-technical aspects of Project Veto are now being worked on and rolled out. So it's not all stopped, but there will be conversations in the future about actually being able to fund a major technology project. But I'll hand over to Cam or
Look, this is, I agree with you, a really important piece of the puzzle when you're wanting to work around families, individuals, children in harm. You want to be able to connect information up from the different agencies that are working on it. It's why the multi-agency tables are an important piece of the puzzle. The technology bit of Project Veto was to provide a kind of a technology underpinning for that. we are not without any underpinning at the moment. We're still using the police FSS, the family safety system, and that still is functioning, and we're grateful to police for keeping that moving. But it's not a nationally consistent or standard process. So the idea will return for Project FETU. The work we've done thus far has actually put us in a much better position to keep building out the systems in the various locations where we are working on the multi-agency responses. There's a lot of work going on in the digital space across government. I think as that starts to settle, there will absolutely be opportunity for us to then ask whether any of the different information sharing or case management systems that are existing in some of the core agencies, which could be police, it could be MSD, it could be Oranga Tamariki, whether some of those systems can be adapted to give us what we need in the Project FETU space. So as a board, at the end of the day, we did not have enough of an alignment and clarity around hosting and an ability to push the project forward at this point. So I would say it's a pushing pause rather than a stopping forever. But for now, we're progressing by making sure we get the online work.
Time for one more question.
And location work functioning.
I think we're going to have this last question, right? I think we've had a good answer.
Yeah, it's just a start. It has always worried me that we haven't got these systems across the children's sector anyway. Have you looked at the possibility of connecting it up with risk systems for children in particular?
Can I, I'll just speak to the children's system because the children's technology system is very old, very clunky. It's a system called Cyrus. And Oranga Tamariki has put in a massive investment into upgrading Cyrus to make sure that we can actually have information on hand about young people and their needs, what needs have been met and haven't been met at the click of a button. So there's no technology upgrades going on across the system. The children's system is getting an upgrade, but it might not necessarily be Project FETU, but there are upgrades happening.
All right, I'm going to call it quits at that point. Thank you, Minister, for attending today. Thank you for your department or your centre, I should say. And Mr. Kibblewhite, enjoy your quiet whiskey tonight or whatever you drink. But
hopefully you can go home now, maybe.
You can go home.
So for the purposes of this being a public hearing, so I'm Lindsay Gibson.
Very nice. We haven't seen much of you lately, Lindsay.
With me is my colleague Brent Burton, and behind me is two more of my colleagues, Chrissy and Richard Scott. So they're on hand in case we need them. But I'll hand over to Brent, who can talk you through.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to thank the chair and members for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate the time set aside to discuss this topic. I also understand that it's at a time of very busy time for the committee, and I'm sure you've had a long day already. So
always time for you.
Thank you very much.
Just so you're aware, we've got 30 until 4:30. So.
What I
20 minutes will go.
Yeah, I wondered to the chair if I could have 4 minutes to introduce the work.
We'll allow you that.
I know that at least one of my colleagues behind me will have the timer on me.
There's someone here in front of you also.
I'm prepared for the 4-minute bell. We looked at how corrections helps people plan for stable housing on release and how they connect people who need it to MSD services and others. This work sits alongside work we did with MHUD and MSD around how they support people in immediate housing need, particularly pathways into emergency housing and transitional housing. For those coming out of corrections care, we saw research that stable housing is a critical factor in reducing reoffending. This outcome is a key objective for corrections. Other research also suggests that potentially as a result of stable housing and wraparound services, there can be less resource reliance on public services in the long run. Focusing on longer term outcomes and on value for money are obviously important lenses we take in our work. I want to acknowledge the great corrections people we spoke to, with difficult jobs and often difficult circumstances. Each was unfailingly wanting better outcomes for the people they worked with in ways that kept the whole community safe. They generally acknowledged how important stable housing is to achieving these outcomes. Corrections has a clear role in doing what it can to help people in its care eventually reintegrate well into society. In practice, this can mean understanding the housing needs of those preparing for release, helping them plan to achieve stable housing outcomes, and where MSD support is needed, doing what it can to connect those people to that agency seamlessly. However, research also indicated that more than half people leaving corrections have an unmet housing need. Corrections told us it currently does not know how many people leave prison with a good plan for their housing needs. We found that corrections has good processes and guidance to support case managers to help people plan for successful, stable housing outcomes. People serving long sentences appear to get more sustained and longer contact and support with case managers. They generally have parole conditions on release, and as you'll know, accommodation is part of eligibility for parole. Regional corrections staff have good relationships with other regional public service officers. Making sure people don't fall through gaps appears most effective when there are these good intra-agency relationships on the ground in regions, including when complex challenges require innovative solutions. People leaving corrections have quite distinct and difficult challenges in finding stable accommodation. Despite this, many people on remand are at risk of not getting sufficient support to help them plan for those needs. Remand represents 40% of prison population and is projected to increase by number and by percentage. There is often uncertainty about their length of stay and the potential for immediate release. Corrections needs to find additional ways of providing people who come to it on remand with useful information about the full range of support that might be available to them on release. This can help them plan for and find stable housing outcomes on release. We acknowledge corrections' view that it is not a primary housing provider and does not consider housing to be its core business. It relies on other public service and housing organisations to support its people on release. But it does have a clear role in understanding people's needs, helping them plan and prepare for it, and where needed, helping connect them seamlessly to MSD.
We're a very impatient committee, as Lindsay knows. But let's get into questions, because I think we want to get down to that level. Who's got questions? Tabitha? Right.
So yeah, thank you so much. It's so important. I met with the parole board chair about this issue because I thought maybe they would collect, because I know corrections doesn't collect the data, but parole board doesn't either. So how do we start collecting the data on where people are going?
Yep. So we understand that corrections has started work with the IDI, the integrated data infrastructure. And we saw some evidence of that, which is starting to go towards that. We know it's difficult to collect the outcomes of people who might not want to necessarily disclose corrections, but we think there are opportunities to work with the IDI. The MSD and MHUD report that we put out sort of asked the question of why agencies can't work together with researchers, providers, and advocacy groups to actually understand those outcomes.
And what was the outcome?
We haven't yet been asked to present to committee on that report yet. I think that is likely to go to another report, the social.
All I'd ask, don't come tell us there's an issue. Tell us what.
Yeah.
The next step is. Right?
So we want MHUD to lead that work, and we think that there are lessons for corrections to share and to learn from in that.
Right, Todd Stevenson.
Yeah, and thanks for both for being here. Yeah, in your obviously your report and working on it. Yeah, what more can you tell us about correction working with those other agencies today? I mean, you mentioned corrections themselves have got some quite good, obviously, resources for their staff, etc. But then actually that interface with the other agencies, how is that working? Is that an area where you think
there's
improvements needed?
I think there's interface in two areas. One's in regional offices where they're working with other public service agencies and providers to get people with challenging and complex needs and providing solutions on the ground. And we think that works reasonably well. And it also means that corrections is able to work with MSD to help people seamlessly move towards their services. At a higher level, I guess, we have seen, as I say, corrections working in the IDI, and we also have seen very recently them providing information and working with MHUD and MSD in that Homelessness Insights report to report some of the data that they're finding about outcomes. Those were probably the key points where we saw them working together with other agencies.
And just one more question, if I might, Mr. Chair, because you particularly mentioned remand prisoners. And obviously we know that is a growing, corrections are dealing with more remand prisoners than they ever have before. Again, in your view, do you think that's one of the issues? They just haven't had such a large remand population before, and so it's not something that's that population of prisoners is not used to working.
We were told by a number of corrections staff that corrections facilities have been built in the past for a remand population of 15%. Now that it's 40%, and I think I've seen projections of it going to 45% over a number of years, they do describe that as a bit of a challenge, yes. There's obviously also uncertainty about how long a person can be on remand and that they can be immediately released, time served or otherwise, which means that case managers might be finding it difficult to get to those people to provide. And I think what we're suggesting is let's find practical ways of getting them information about the support that they can go to. And that might be things like, my view is that it could be things like group inductions. It could be things like videos shown to numerous people. It could be those sorts of things. It might not necessarily be that a case manager has to see person
something simple that could be delivered in a timely manner.
Possibly, yes.
In your report, you say 27 million was set aside in 24-25, and that allowed for 1,200 placements. That sounds all very good. So future budget going forward, and what sort of percentage of the prison population, both remand and prisoners, does 1,200 represent? Is it like? Well,
there's 15,000 people leaving corrections every year. So 40% of that, I guess, is about
more than
6,000. And then you've got 1,200 people in those.
Yeah, but some will be on remand for a day, right?
Yeah, certainly some can. I think could be wrong. I think I read something the other day about the average being something like 89 days. But you're quite right. But there's a high portion of 1 to 10 days.
But even if it's 89 days, you don't think a lot of those people, when they come out, even if they're remand, don't go back into a home of some sort? Don't have a home?
Well, I don't think corrections or us knows the answer to that question. I don't think we know because we, say the collective we, are not collecting information.
So we don't
on
know
the
whether
outcomes
1,200 is good or bad, actually.
Well, the 1,200 is in supported accommodation, and we heard a number of good things about supported accommodation, but overridingly, everyone said, well, that's brilliant for 16 weeks. What happens then? And again, no, we didn't see measurement of the outcomes.
Good point. Okay, Duncan?
So I'm just interested to try and put the finger on where the problem is, because it does, you know, as a constituency MP, prisoners are the hardest people to find places for. Right?
Absolutely.
But for pretty obvious reasons, people don't really like them going into accommodation. It strikes me that in the legislation, there's kind of the ability to engage in that kind of work, reintegration work, but no real mandate, if you know what I mean. That it's, and I'm not sure if you're saying, if part of the problem is that corrections can say, well, we do what we can, but it's not our actual job, because it's not in the legislation, or whether it's more of a organisational issue than a funding, you know, or is it just a whole mix of funding, legislation, cultural?
I couldn't put a finger on whether it's on the legislation side of things, but there is a clear expectation for corrections to do what it can to ensure that people are able to successfully integrate back into the community. And so there is an expectation of that, yes, and I think it's more
within the organisation.
I think it's more than the organisation, but I would have to check that. But what I would say is, it's if corrections has a role, has an objective of reducing reoffending, and if it has an objective of reintegrating people successfully,
this is a key point.
then this is key.
Thanks.
Could you just talk about, and I don't know, why is it called out of gate? I presume it is obvious, but it seems a weird title to use.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's just put that on its side. You said there's 9.8 million set aside for it, and that's part of what you were just talking about.
Yep.
School, I presume that's what that service does. Again, can you give us an indication, you know, how many thousand prisoners or remand prisoners does this serve? And do you have a view whether it's adequate or whether it's grossly under-resourced or what?
Well, I understand, and I'm trying to find the number here in amongst a whole lot of numbers, but I think there was 2,645 people started the out-of-gate program. I don't think anyone knows the outcome of that program. Just to be clear, Out-of-Gate is not a housing provider. It's a sort of a navigational service.
Yeah, but it's like what you're talking about.
Yep, and it's available to people on remand or those on sentences of less than 24 months.
So if you opened up the program or saw the start of the video, your account is 2,600.
Yep.
But we don't even know whether they looked at it to the end, nor whether they accessed the service.
Well, we understand they started the service. What happened from that point?
Who's they? Who's they?
Oh, sorry, people on remand who choose to go on that program, and it is a choice. And I think one of the things that we're wanting to say is, or one of the things that we were told is, out-of-gate might only be in someone's knowledge if they're told about it by a case manager, and if they don't get to see a case manager, out-of-gate won't be something on the minds of a person leaving remand.
And I think that's one of the other points is around, you know, what are the practical changes that corrections can make to ensure that the information is getting to those certain people, and also in terms of measuring and tracking, or what impact does that have in terms of particularly the loop back into the corrections system.
Yeah.
Right. Who else got questions?
I've got one.
Yeah, go Timothy.
Boarding houses. So that's one of the big places where some of these people go. Will you be looking into some of that and the lack of regulation that exists in those boarding houses? Or is that a bit out?
I don't think that's on the plan yet. One of the things that we do intend to do, probably in perhaps a couple of years, is to follow up a little bit on what's happened in response to our recommendations. One thing I would say about boarding houses, both in this work and the work of MSD and MHUD, is that they are not, people told us they were not safe places for all people. They were often seen as last resort. I don't think anybody wants to picture a society where the whole problem is solved by boarding houses.
Yeah, and that's another big constituency complaint that I get, is that they just seem to be like poorly placed in random places, and people get upset about it. It's like, well, where else can they?
I'm not sure about placement or geography, but what I do, what we were told is that they're not often safe places for people, particularly people who have very complex needs, including mental health challenges, and addiction challenges is another one too.
And it ties into some of the things this committee's heard earlier today around the gaps around what's available on the ground for people to access. And I
Right,
think this
last question to
system-wide-
Malo, and then we're going to get started.
I've just got a question around independence that people are able to have once they leave a corrections facility. So a couple of different aspects to that. I understand kind of colloquially from speaking to prisons that fewer people are able to get placements when they job placements, so in work placements, just to do with the overall higher unemployment, and obviously that's having a reflection there.
Yep.
And the second thing is the amount of money that people are given when they leave to try and set up hasn't changed. I think in
Many
how
years.
long, like 20 years,
Many
something like
years, yeah.
a really, really long time. So it's some of the reason that we're having these accommodation issues associated with people's ability to be able to kind of independently pay for what they need in order to set up
I don't, we didn't cover that, but I don't doubt that that's the case. Of course, for those that can't afford, don't have the income and therefore can't afford to sort of go into the private market, one of the key things for us is how corrections is connecting people to MSD.
Okay, cool. We heard the message. Right, guys, we can't refer to this report.
May I just say one thing? We did put some thought into questions that the committee may want to ask corrections about our report.
Yeah, we've seen them.
Yeah.
You've seen them?
Yep, we've seen them.
Okay,
Let's rip into it. Right, and I think we've got enough here to members and all know what they want to ask, I'm sure.
Sweet as.
Right, let's get these people in, eh?
They're here.
They're here? Right, you're coming here. Right,
Okay, I knew you were here.
right, cool.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been waiting patiently. I've seen you down the back here for a long time,
That's right. I've spent some time here this week.
immersed in our processes. Right, do you want we've got 20 minutes, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. I'd rather let the committee ask you questions, but if you wanted just a couple of minutes.
That would be great. Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce ourselves, and then I will spend a couple of minutes with a high-level response to the report. I'm Juanita Ryan. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive for Communities, Partnerships and Pathways for the Department of Corrections. Got Dr. Bronwyn Morrison to my left, who is the Director of Reintegration and Community Services, and Rob Jones to my right, who is the Director of Integrated Systems. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to engage with the committee on this important topic today. Corrections welcomed the OAG report, and we are pleased its recommendations are broadly consistent with the direction that we are heading. We agree strongly with the report's central premise that stable and secure housing is critical to successful reintegration and reducing reoffending. While Corrections is not a housing agency, we have a deliberate and targeted role in supporting people as they transition from prison back into the community, particularly where the risk to the public is the highest. I want to make 3 key points up front. First, we are already making a significant and targeted investment in this space. We currently fund, as I said before, 327 supported accommodation beds nationwide, supporting people with medium through to high risk and complex needs. These placements are ideally short-term and transitional in theory to support up to that 1,200 people per year. In addition, we operate 33 beds on Corrections land for the highest risk individuals, those who cannot be safely accommodated elsewhere in the community. These beds are consistently allocated and represent a critical part of our risk management system. Second, we accept the direction of the OAG recommendations and are actively progressing them. We've already made significant changes through our integrated pathways work, which is strengthening how our case managers and probation officers work together, improving our reintegration planning and enabling better measurement of outcomes. And we acknowledge there is more work to do, particularly in improving how we monitor effectiveness, and that work is well underway, and we will speak to that shortly. Third and finally, this is fundamentally a system-wide challenge that Corrections cannot solve alone. Each year, more than 11,000 people, individual people, 15,000 people coming out of prison, but it's 11,000 individual people are released from prison, and around 26,000 are managed in the community. Supporting this safe reintegration requires coordinated action across the housing and social system. We work closely with MSD, Kāinga Ora, iwi and community providers to connect people to housing and support,
but the wider housing system also ultimately determines availability and access. We see supported accommodation as critical, a short-term investment that fills a real gap at the point of release and directly supports public safety. Thank you, and we welcome your
Okay,
questions.
right, who wants to lead off with questions? Who wants to go?
Well, I can feel like.
Okay, Dr. Duncan, please.
Because quite a tricky question, right? And I guess one of the first question is, how big is this problem? Because in terms of the work that you are trying to do, which is to keep people out of jail, right? Then if we're failing at this bit, this accommodation and support bit, and if we're failing, if you can fit 1,200 in a year and there's 1,200 who don't fit in, do we have any idea of the size of the problem, of how many people we're actually failing?
I'll kick off and I'll hand to Bronwyn. Where we are assessing housing need consistently is with those who are on sentence and have community conditions, which are coming back out into the that we will follow them up in the community. Often that's the parole board setting conditions that we need to monitor and manage. And out of that group, that's about 6,000 people per year. It's around about 800 people that are identified as having no fixed abode. So it's not necessarily half of all the people in prison. And even of that number, that could be due to accommodation falling through. It could be due to someone couch surfing for a period of time and then finding a suitable accommodation, and it could be to do with someone being genuinely homeless. So that is the group that we are, I guess, the most concerned to ensure that we're working across the system.
If there are two classes then we don't have visibility over, one is where I serve my entire sentence because I just walk free because there's no conditions. Or, okay, you're shaking here, we come back to it, and then you've got the remand accused who, for whatever reason, get not guilty and they walk, often from the courts, right? Are they both problems, or is it because the last one seems to be? Is the second one as well?
It is, and the real challenge with people on remand who don't have conditions is they often are quite mistrustful of the system, quite mistrustful of corrections. They're often not inclined to share with us if they do have an address. So it's hard for us to track actually whether they've got somewhere safe to go or not. What we do have in remand is the reintegrative remand service that was referred to earlier. And you'll have seen in the report actually over the last 5 years, the number accessing that service has doubled from about 500 to 1,000. And the idea of that service, which doesn't require a case manager to have engagement with the individual, is to support people with these sorts of needs, noting that the vast majority of people that come into prison are there for less than 15 days. So it's quite hard for us to engage them in a meaningful shift to support housing in that short period of time.
The majority of people who come into prison are there for less than 15 days, did you just say?
Yeah, a large remand. Yeah, and the remand population.
So I think just...
Okay, so can we just dig down to that number a little bit? Because that's really unusual, right? 15 days on remand seems very short when you've got a remand population that's 40% of 11,000, which would suggest that you've got a churn of many, many thousands of people going through remand. That doesn't quite add up for me, especially when we know that there are some people who are on remand for 200 or 300 days, right? Can you explain that?
I maybe help with that, Duncan. So I think what we often talk about is average. And of course, when you've got people there for very long periods and you're looking at an average, that immediately starts to blow the numbers out. But people do cycle through. So you have quite a high attrition with people in for a month or less. And, I think it's important to really reflect on what the reality of that month or 2 week period might look like. People are coming in, they're coming off drugs and alcohol. They're very, it can be very upset and elevated.
Not given bail first time round.
Yeah.
In the second hearing, that's sorted out of bail.
And, charges change too. So you might, be on a charge and then suddenly your charges get negotiated down. You're then on bail. So it's just a really dynamic space. New charges might come on in the midst of that. So it's quite difficult and it's very unpredictable to sometimes know who's going to be there for extended periods and who's going to be in and out.
Presumably the longer you're on remand, the more likely it is housing. Because if you're on remand for 2 weeks, the likelihood is that you've still got your rental or your accommodation previously there.
Well, I think that's the other thing. People don't always have stable housing prior to entry into the correction system.
Yeah, you guys, just throw this around.
Just so I can clarify something, if you're on remand and you're released after, say, 2 weeks, do you have to give an address to, now, if you're on remand or if you've got a sentence for, say, 2 years and you're released, you've got to give an address, or you've only got to give an address if it's part of your bail condition? Parole conditions.
So released on conditions, people that are going towards the parole board can be.
Because that was the issue that we were seeing a lot of in
genuinely
Whanganui,
compelled to give us an
right?
address.
Was if they were released on parole, then it was managed.
Yeah.
But if they weren't, if they were just released, we were having challenges around where they were being released to, essentially.
Provide a bit of
dropped off
clarity
on the
there.
side of the
So
park.
under the 2-year mark, if you get released at about the halfway point of your sentence, you will be released on conditions. So that will require some kind of probation engagement in the community. We would know the addresses of those people for the most part, as long as, you know, they're willing to tell us. And even when they're no fixed abode, typically within a short period of being released from prison, they're reporting to a probation officer and we would know an address for them. Similarly with parole, part of the ability to be able to get paroled is you have to present a reasonable release plan, which housing would be a core component part of that to ensure that community safety needs will be met.
So you can release someone, just picking up on something you just said, on the basis of no fixed abode. So you can literally know that when they're released.
A short sentence, it's not a decision to release them. They are automatically released under legislation.
Yeah, I get that point. I'm more asking that just the way you framed that, it sounded like at the point of release, you are clear that they have no fixed abode.
Not for parole, but we don't make the decision of
I
releases.
appreciate that. I'm more asking about information. So the way I heard what you said was that even if you release them and they have no fixed abode, so you're aware at that point.
Well, I guess we're not making the decision to release them.
I'm not saying you're making the decision. I'm asking
You are
about
correct.
whether or
There
not
are
you know.
some cases that someone will get to the end of they'll be at their sentence release date. They may have been declined by the parole board a number of times. And they may be at the point of release. We may not have a stable address for them, and we would generally be aware of that. If
And so in that scenario, is there anything that corrections does from that point? So I get you don't have to, and I get that, you know, they've got to be released and all of that. I'm asking, with that piece of information, what's the process that happened?
So that particular group would be picked up almost certainly by a probation officer in the community. So the probation officer in the community and the case manager in prison are working really closely to try and resolve these things, because we know this is not just about an individual's wellbeing, but it really increases their risk of reoffending if they're so destabilised in terms of some of those basic foundations. And so as Bronwyn was saying before, as they return to the community and they're required to report into probation.
But if they're not released on probation, what happens?
That would probably be a very small group of people who are on a sentence who would get to the end of that finite sentence in prison that wouldn't have a period where they were on probation. And if that was the case, there would be little follow-up that we could do without their voluntary engagement.
Just have no mandate to work with those people who aren't being managed.
So what happened? So I get it's a small amount of people. So walk me through though what happened. So I've finished my sentence. I've gone right to the end. There's no probation. I say I've got no fixed abode. I'm at the gates. What happens to me?
First, just to back up on that, we would do everything we could before that point for that not to be the outcome for that individual. And the case manager would be walking alongside them. We've regularly got probation officers in the community as well, constantly reviewing addresses. So engaging with the individual, there may be multiple addresses that are checked during that period of time. So
you'll physically go and check them?
Yes, we will ensure that
if they are on conditions.
If they're on conditions, you need to front up and say, where are you sleeping here?
But assume my scenario. So you've done all of that, final day, at the gate.
Is that
it?
I've done this sentence.
Well, there's a very.
I'm not trying to get you to answer. I'm just trying to understand.
Let's go to Tabitha. Right, Tabitha.
Just a question around the data as well. Is there a way that corrections can talk to MSD? Because surely people coming out are not going into home ownership. So surely they'll be collecting, some form of accommodation.
I think the challenge for us partly is the issue of getting people on housing lists prior to being released. So you've got that challenge of coming out of prison and then having to get an appointment with MSD to then get your housing needs assessed, because while you're in prison, you technically have housing. So that's been something that we've been working really closely with MSD to see if we can get those processes, particularly at that regional level, which Brent mentioned, to get them much clearer so that people can possibly go on housing lists prior to the point, particularly when we know what their release date's likely to be, which is often the case with people who are on those longer sentences, who tend to be those higher risk people that we are, most concerned about from a community safety perspective.
And we're certainly not trying to do this alone. We are certainly not trying to do this alone, and we really are working hard with our colleagues in other parts of the system to support a pathway for people that helps them just get back out into the community.
And just,
another one?
just follow up on that, I know this isn't your decision, you don't set the budgets, but the Step to Freedom grant, surely that was originally designed to put people into a bit of accommodation in the meantime while they sort out all their MSD stuff. Do you think that plays a role in that amount hasn't been adjusted for decades, and that maybe is that something that's difficult because that person coming out of prison doesn't have any immediate form of income to access housing? How does that play into it?
Not to go into the steps of freedom itself, but I think there are, for many people in prisons, we are working with them at so many points to try to support their accommodation, that is probably quite a small consideration in the overall picture of what we can work with them to offer up in terms of accommodation options, both, as I said, to the point of houses on corrections land for those who are really, really difficult to safely accommodate, our accommodation, MSD, and other private rentals. So we really tried hard not to make something like that become a barrier.
Well, I've got Camilla. Camilla? All right, Duncan?
Dr. Bronwyn was just going to say something.
Going to say, I think affordability is an issue when people try and transition then out of transitional housing. So that is a real challenge.
How much do you get?
350.
Yeah. Which doesn't last long.
It strikes me, one of the related issues is that people leave prison broke, right? Has any thought been given to increasing the rates of pay that prisoners get so they can get a little kitty, of $1,000, say, for a year's work? You know what I mean? Because at the moment it's like
60 cents or something.
60 cents an hour is the most they can get, isn't it? And that just pays for your noodles.
So we are just about to embark on a large-scale review of prison industries, but also vocational training and education. So that will be a consideration within that piece of work.
And when will you finish that by?
Hoping within the next 12 months. That's the fixed term contract, so the time is running.
Prisoners' wages were reviewed already, though, weren't they? It's not wages, it's not called wages, but
I think it's something that we constantly turn our attention to, but I can't recall a formal review.
It strikes me as a relatively
good
Thank you, and thanks for this report. I mean, I think just apart from obviously the need for human beings to have housing, the recidivism aspect of those who don't have appropriate housing makes this an incredibly important issue to solve. I had a look through the report. I couldn't see if there were any other jurisdictions who maybe have done this better than New Zealand has, or was that something that you considered at all?
I guess wasn't our report, was the Office of the Auditor General's report.
Is that something that's
So New Zealand actually has, compared to some other, particularly Australian jurisdictions, we have a lot more supported accommodation that we provide. Some of those jurisdictions have minimal, if no, supported accommodation provided from a corrections space for people exiting prison. So I think in that regard, New Zealand's just quite unique with its geography, its population distribution, which creates its own particular set of challenges. So in some ways, it's quite difficult to compare. But certainly, I think the Housing First initiative has been one that we've really, copied from other jurisdictions and used with considerable success here in New Zealand.
Hey, I asked two questions before. First one is the 9.8 million for out of gate. If you got 18 million, would that help, or you don't know?
I mean, I guess, no, I don't know.
I know it's a weird question because everyone will say we need more money, but could you put up justify a good business case why it should be 18 million? I'm trying to understand just how compelling this case is.
I think that the challenge from the Auditor General's report around the need for us to better qualify and measure the impact of our services is compelling. And it is certainly something that we have picked up and acknowledged, and they are correct in saying, look, we understand the number of starts. We need to get much better at also collecting for this particular
Finishes.
program, the completions,
Lindsay at the
absolutely,
back
and what
there
that means.
Waving ahead.
Yeah,
like that.
and actually, but what is the impact? So it's not just about the starts and completes. We really need to also be consistently understanding the impact and quality assuring them. And that is part of the work program that Bronwyn is driving. So there might be more you want to say about that.
Yes, we are making some changes to the out of gate service. So we are sort of taking that more towards that high and complex need group of people. So trying to deliver a higher quality of service to the people who, you know, pose the greatest community safety risk and have the highest level of need. And that's based on evidence that when we work with those people, we get the best outcomes and best reductions in reoffending.
When would you likely, if we were to write in our report that we recommend we invite you to back experts on this, when are you likely to have that piece of work finished?
So that service goes live on the 1st of July. So we'll be looking to evaluate that within the next probably 2 years.
I just have a follow-up question. Maybe this is part of your measurement, because obviously I think you mentioned you're working with the IDI.
Yeah.
Because you could then track when those people hit another part of the government system. Is that what you're kind of
So
thinking?
yeah,
Like-
and we are exploring doing some research with Otago University. I'm really mindful that the transitional housing data set arrives in the IDI in the next month.
Yeah.
So it opens up a really good opportunity for us to look at the interplay between transitional housing use and then longer term reoffending outcomes. And I think it'd be really beneficial for us to take that longer view look too, to look what happens, you know, maybe 1 year, 2 year, but also maybe 5 years to see what the real
All
impact
right,
of
we
it is.
heard that. Pity it wasn't in the report, but we'll hear that. Second thing, the 27 million on supported accommodation does 300 beds, 1,200 people. What are you going to say? Did you go to the minister and say, well, we need a lot more money, or what? Again, I'm trying to judge what's the unmet need potentially.
Yep. I will pass this to Bronwyn. I think what we've recognised is similar to what Bronwyn has just indicated there, is the way we've established some of the accommodation is when we reflect back on it, it's not always necessarily in the right geographical location. We have got a lot of people with higher needs where we don't have accommodation set up for, and those with some lower and less complex needs where we do have accommodation for. And a lot of that group can actually find their own way quite well out into the community and towards the accommodation independently of us. So the work that Bronwyn has been leading is very much around how do we better meet the needs of those who will struggle the most to obtain secure accommodation in the community, and doing quite a lot of alignment of that piece of work to support that the evidence of who we should be focused on the most as an agency for that, you know, security of our community perspective is who's accessing the beds.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some real challenges that we face in terms of transitioning people out of those services. So whilst we might say they're transitional and we're aiming for 3 to 6 months, some people do spend extended periods of time in there because we really struggle, particularly older people who've come out of prison who perhaps require some rest home care. We really struggle at times to find placements for those people. So we're really looking at what additional services we might add to our portfolio to better meet those needs. I think part of the challenge here too is a community resistance to having people in the community. So they're happier to have those lower end, lower risk people living alongside them, you know.
Are you finding a problem when you've got someone who's, 70 or whatever, and declining health, that private facilities are saying, we don't want that sort of person in our...
It is a challenge. It is a challenge.
Right.
It's something to look forward to, Duncan, I'm afraid. All right, cool.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you.
Hey, well, look, I want to thank you all. I think we'll be making a recommendation that you should come back to the future Justice Committee.
Yeah.
I think from you heard, it is such a vital part of that, reducing the cycle of people transitioning out of prison back into prison. So the more you can do, we just encourage you to do that. But thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Maddie.